A man was found dead in his hotel room, and his internal organs appeared to have been absolutely destroyed. But he had no external bruises or injuries. How is that possible? What happened in room 348? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Greg Fleniken. Viewer discretion is advised. September 15th, 2010, Beaumont, Texas. It was a hot, humid, yucky day. A successful businessman had checked into a local hotel, specifically the MGM Elegante Hotel. Greg Fleniken was born on December 26th, 1954. The 55-year-old man was very happily married to the absolute love of his life, Susie. He was described as a super devoted guy. He was a wonderful brother, a loving uncle, and just a tremendous friend. Greg was a grand lover of the outdoors. He enjoyed to hunt and fish, and a lot of the times he would use his catches to prepare big, nice, fancy meals, just for the family. He also loved to cuddle up outside with a blanket with his wife and watch the sun rise in the morning and then the sun set at night. It's just something they found to be very relaxing as they sat there reading books. Greg just seemed like a really fantastic guy, just a really cool, chill guy. Someone we probably would all love to have known. He was the vice president of a company called the LGM Land Company. And from what I understand, I think the business is based in Texas, but he lived in Lafayette, Louisiana. I think that's the correct scenario here. But Greg would actually travel a lot. So he would be in Texas all the time. He would go to other states. He had a very involved job, obviously. He was no stranger to using hotel rooms. He did it literally all the time. And that's exactly what he was doing on September 15th, 2010. He had checked into the MGM hotel and gotten his room. Greg and his wife, it was basically like a ritual. Every single time he went out of town or was staying in a hotel, he would always call the following morning just to, recap her and make sure he was doing okay. But on September 16th, 2010, the morning after, she got no phone calls from him. So she tried calling him herself. He never picked up. Then she tried contacting his work, and she was kind of concerned to find out that Greg didn't show up for work either, and that's very unusual for him. He is a very prompt person. He never misses a day, and if he did, he would always call, but no one had heard from him. So then Susie, she calls the hotel because at this point she's very concerned. She's very scared. And she asks them to please go check on Greg in his room. So the hotel staff first knocked on his door, called out his name, got no response. They tried calling the phone in his room. There was no answer. So they used their key to open the door and go inside. And when they did, they found Greg. He was basically on the ground, kind of on his knees, but his head had fallen over to the ground. So he was sort of like, I'm not sure how to describe it. He was like hunched over. And they also noticed there was like smoke coming out of his left hand, which they would find was a still lit cigarette. As they approached him, they realized pretty quickly that Greg Fleniken was deceased. So obviously 911 was called and detectives arrived on the scene within 15-20 minutes. Some of the things they noticed, outside of the body was that the room itself was extremely hot. It was a very hot day, and for some reason the AC wasn't turned on in Greg's room. Something they would later find out through questioning Susie and friends and family is that Greg always had the AC on. No matter where he was, he always had it. He loved the room cold. And on a day like that, he would have absolutely had it on. So something was kind of amiss about that. The door to the hotel room showed absolutely no signs of forced entry. There was No sign of a struggle or a fight taking place in the room. Everything was very neat and organized. All of Greg's belongings were still there. There was no missing, like his watch, very expensive watch, was still there, out in the open. His wallet was out in the open on a table, and it had several credit cards. It had hundreds of dollars of cash in it. So whatever happened to Greg probably wasn't a robbery. But what the hell happened to Greg anyway? Honestly, at first glance, it just looked like he somehow died of natural causes. Police, they would question the occupants of the surrounding rooms. No one heard any fighting, no yelling, nothing out of the ordinary. They heard absolutely nothing. The natural causes death kind of added up once they got in contact with Susie, who was absolutely devastated. But she would say that, he was an absolute smoker. I mean, he smoked packs of cigarettes each day, and he did not eat healthy. He did not exercise, did not go to the gym, so he wasn't like the healthiest 55-year-old guy in the world. So the natural causes thing seemed very plausible. So he probably just had a heart attack while he was smoking a cigarette and died. But don't forget, you're on my channel. He did not die of natural causes. This is a bizarre one, folks. Very, very bizarre. At his autopsy, the coroner would find only 2 injuries or wounds to his body. He had a 1-inch, they said, laceration or bruised kind of thing on his left cheek. They surmised that happened once he fell to the ground, and he must have hit his head on the ground, causing that kind of injury. The other injury was to his groin. There was some sort of laceration or cut in his groin. But none of those 2 things would have led to his death. They both seemed very small and insignificant. However, inside of his body, it told a very, very different story. His intestines had been shredded. He had 2 broken ribs. His liver and stomach both had significant tears in them. And then he had a hole in his heart. The coroner would determine that these are all instances of his organs being severely crushed because he took a very, very severe beating. These are all consistent with people who had been punched and kicked very hard in various areas. But here's the problem. He had no external injuries in any of those areas. No bruises, no cuts, nothing to indicate that he was beaten at all. How the hell is that possible? Well, it isn't, but here we are. How was this guy punched and kicked? First of all, without leaving any bruises, but second of all, without anybody hearing of this type of fight. This magnitude of injuries occurring would have made someone scream, and there would have been people knocking on doors and asking what the hell's going on. But nothing. But the coroner would rule this death a homicide. And homicide detectives, well, they now had quite a puzzle to solve. This was an extremely confusing homicide, to say the least. So they go through all of the rooms again, and they question every single person that they can that was still there at the hotel. Through all of this questioning, once again, they all stuck to their stories. No one heard screaming, no one heard fighting, no altercations, nothing. One person said they thought they heard the faint sound of a gunshot, but first of all, he wasn't shot, and second of all, that popping noise may have been the power kicking back on, because that night there was a power outage, and the power outage was caused by Greg. He was making some popcorn in the microwave when the microwave caused a short, and it knocked out the power in several rooms on the floor he was staying on. The maintenance man arrived, and this is around 8:30 at night. He's already at home, but he was called in to fix this issue, so it's, a late repair for him. But he fixed the issue, and the power kicked back on, so everything seemed hunky-dory. Police would look into the maintenance guy just in case, because and they found out he did have a criminal history. So was this something that he got upset about because he was called into work, at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night? to fix the stupid power outage, and he just got mad and he took it out on Greg because he caused it. Again, leaving no bruises, and he had nothing on they checked, he had nothing on his knuckles or his fists, nothing. There was no signs that he had attacked anyone barehanded. But at any rate, they were able to clear him because they were able to confirm he was actually away from the hotel during the time frame that this crime, possible murder, likely happened. Next, police learned that the people staying in the room next to him, room 349, just so happened to be electricians. They were there visiting for work or a conference or something. So then police had a little theory of, okay, well, they're electricians, and maybe they figured out that Greg's microwave mishap is what caused the power outage, and this made them mad and caused a ruckus and a fight to break out, and they killed him maybe on accident or on purpose. But again, no bruises, no wounds, no markings on any of their fists, nothing to indicate that they had beat him up. So this whole thing is just getting more and more confusing. Detectives are scratching their heads. They don't understand how this happened, and if someone did it to him, how? How did they do it? His organs had basically exploded almost in his body. That's how bad the damage was. So Greg's wife, Susie, well, she would hire her own private investigator to look into this because police were just like, we don't know. Once the private investigator got involved, he would ask Susie some questions. One of those questions was there anything about the crime scene that you were told that seems very unusual? She said there were two things. She said she learned that the AC was turned off, and again, she knows her husband, he would never do that, especially on a very hot day, so that seemed weird. The second thing is that she was told that the cigarette was in Greg's left hand, but Greg was right-handed, and he always smoked holding the cigarette in his right hand. Something that she found to be unusual. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it seemed weird. So he looked into the records to find out when the power outage happened, and it all showed that the maintenance man arrived around 8:30, sometime around 9 o'clock. He was done with the problem and he left. So when the power outage happened, the AC would have shut off. When the power came back on, Greg likely forgot to turn it back on, thinking it was still on when the power came on. It would have taken a few hours for the room to have heated up to a point where Greg would have gone, oh shit, and then turned on the AC. So the private investigator kind of theorized that this death had to have happened sometime between 9 p.m. and 11:30, maybe midnight-ish. Because he figured that's the point when he would have noticed the AC was not on. He theorized as well, the cigarette in the left hand, well, was that planted by someone? Did someone place it in his hand for whatever reason? But there is still that one big issue. No one heard a fight. No one heard a ruckus. He had no bruises on his body to indicate he was hit or punched or kicked or anything where his organs were basically destroyed. The PI, the private investigator, he just felt in his gut that the electricians in room 349, they had something to do with this. He just felt off about them. He did find out that the men inside that room, the electricians, were partying and were very, very, very drunk that night, being very loud, very belligerent. And it sounds like people had called to complain on them, but it also sounds like the hotel did not stop them at all. So, the PI came to this conclusion. Whatever the fatal blow was that created all of the internal organs to be damaged, all of that happened while Greg was alone in his room. But how? How does that happen? So, are we talking fucking ghosts at this point? What? How does this happen? I'm going to say it a billion times. The PI questions the electricians that were in the room again. And by this time, by the way, they're back home in Wisconsin. They also interview their coworkers that they were with constantly. They learned that one of the men who was booked in that room, Lance Mueller, he owned a gun and he brought it everywhere he went. But again, Greg wasn't shot, so it's not really relevant. But wait, wasn't there a hotel guest who earlier said they thought they heard a gunshot going off that night? Huh. At the time, that was just disregarded as you heard the wrong thing, or otherwise, but Greg wasn't shot. So a gunshot would have nothing to do with this, right? The PI says, all right, let's go back to the hotel room. Let's look at it one more time. Maybe we'll find something. This is now several months later. First, they go into the room Greg was in, room 348. They noticed on a wall there was like a kind of like a big circular indent, as if something had like gone through it, right? But there wasn't anything else that they noticed. So then they went into room 349. In that room, they found something interesting. In one of the walls, they found a small hole. That hole had been plugged up with white toothpaste. Yeah, toothpaste. When they dug the toothpaste out, they could see through the hole. So they took one of those cool little lasers and they put it through the hole in room 349. And lo and behold, it went to the exact point where the indent was in Greg's room, in room 348. This, ladies and gentlemen, was a bullet hole. Holy shit. Was Greg shot? They wanted to exhume Greg's body to see if they could find any fragments of a bullet. Unfortunately, he had been cremated, so there was no evidence. But they had all of the autopsy photos. The coroner was very thorough about taking pictures of everything. And so what they did was they went back to those photos and they looked at the injury on his groin. And holy hell, it looked like something had entered his body through his groin. They looked at the photo of his heart, and there was a perfect little hole in his heart. Holy shit, it looked like Greg was shot through the groin and was killed when it entered his heart. Greg was likely lying in his bed in a almost flat position, and he was eating popcorn and watching a movie, when suddenly a bullet entered his groin, severed his intestines, went through his liver, his stomach, and destroyed those, and then punctured his heart and killed him. But not right away. They came to the conclusion that he was smoking in bed, right? And when this all happened, he probably stood up and sort of wavered before he kind of collapsed to his knees and fell to the ground. So the cigarette being in his left hand wasn't really anything. Now, they really need to question these men again who were staying in that room. So they traveled back to Wisconsin to talk to Lance Mueller and the other person who was occupying that room, Tim Steinmetz. They really put pressure on these men to say something that happened that night. And the pressure, finally, it worked. And I believe it was Tim who would finally reveal what happened. Mueller, Steinmetz, and a third man named Trent Pisano, they had gone to the hotel room. They were severely drunk in the room. And Mueller had his gun in the room. So they were just shit-faced drunk, just being absolute idiots. Again, they were called on, but the hotel never seemed to stop them. This is when Mueller took out his gun and began to wave it around like a drunk idiot, when he accidentally, I guess, pulled the trigger and dropped the gun, and the bullet went through a wall. And at first they're like, oh my God. And according to them, they listened through the wall to see if there was any anyone making any sounds or noises, maybe something got hit, but they heard nothing. It was dead silence in the room, so they're like, oh, whew, there's no one in the room, so we're good. So they said, okay, fuck it, let's go back downstairs to the hotel bar and let's get more drunk. And that's exactly what they did. But when they did that, Lance Mueller, feeling a little oh shit, I'm worried I made the gunshot. So he took his gun and he hid it in his trunk, just in case. And then they went back up to the room a couple hours later, and they claimed they heard like a loud cough coming from room 348. So then they're like, oh shit, there is someone in the room, but they're coughing, so they're making noises, which means they're fine. They probably didn't even notice. So went back into the room and just did more stuff, more talking and partying. The next morning, when all of the commotion was going on, one of the men had heard a police officer kind of talking to another one, suggesting that, oh, it was probably a heart attack. So the three men were like, oh, okay, so it was just coincidence that this guy's dead in his room. It wasn't from us, right? It was from a heart attack. Okay, we're good. But they still didn't say anything to police. They mentioned nothing. They lied about it. They said, nope, they heard nothing, saw nothing. Nope, sorry. And it goes more into show that they patched up the hole, they hid the gun to basically indicate they felt guilt about what happened, but they didn't know they had actually caused it. Investigators don't even truly know at this point if the cough they heard was even actually true. That could have been something they were just using to make themselves feel better, to tell police that, oh, he was fine, when, much later on, he was good. So I can only find information about what happened to one of the men. So Lance Mueller was charged with manslaughter, and he would be convicted of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In terms of Tim Steinmetz and the other fella, Mr. Pisano, I don't see anything happening with them criminally. However, Susie would end up suing the hotel. And one of the reasons why is because they didn't respond to the drunk people in a room. If they had responded, maybe this never would have happened, right? But eventually that suit would be dropped because she reached settlements, is what I saw, with Mr. Steinmetz and Mr. Pisano. So I don't know what that entails. It looks like it was probably a private settlement. Can you even imagine the odds of this happening ever, including even just one time? Like, think about it. If Greg was a couple of inches to either side on the bed, this wouldn't have happened. Let's say Greg took an extra 45 seconds to a minute in the shower. This may not have happened. He was trying to find snacks to eat while watching a movie. If he had to spend another 15, 20 seconds picking out a snack, this may not have ever happened. It's just the absolute narrow odds of this actually occurring are so asinine that it's unbelievable that it happened. Like, for that bullet to be accidentally shot off in the exact area it was shot off, and then to go through the exact portion of the walls to go right into exactly where Greg was laying and perfectly through his groin and up through his body. That is insane that happened. That is just such a precise trajectory that I don't even know if you could recreate if you're firing blindly through a wall. And not even intentionally. This was all done on accident. And they believe that. The police believed it was an accident. It just... Jesus. It just blows my mind. But yeah, that's it. True crimerers. That is this case. Truly crazy one. But it's also super interesting. But I hope Greg is resting in peace. All right, so as usual, if you want to see shorter cases from me, I have a whole bunch over on TikTok, although I won't be really posting much over there at this point. I will be primarily here on YouTube. But I have a whole bunch more cases up there if you want to scroll through them. That'll be linked in my in the description below. If you have any cases you would like me to cover, you can email me at mikey@truecrimerer.com. But please first check my case list, which is in my link tree in the description below. Click on it, scroll through it. There's like 4,200 plus names on there. And you can search on your phone or on a computer to find a name. If you don't see the name at all, then email me. If you do see the name, please don't email me that name because I already have it on there. I pick my cases at random. Eventually I will get to all of them, but it's just I do it randomly to make it fair. So, lastly, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch. We sell t-shirts. We sell, this is, hoodie season because the weather is getting nice and chilly. Even here in Arizona, finally. Yay. Our 3 minutes of winter is here. Winter is coming. It'll last like 13 minutes, but it's coming. Yeah. But yeah, we also just launched the Christmas ornaments that were a big hit last year. So those are up there now. And yeah, so cool. Well, that is it, true crimerers. Until the next time. The government is hiding aliens in Area 51, and I am one of those aliens. I was kidnapped by the government back in 1953. I'm an alien. Please rescue me. Oh my god. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of